20 pardons tonight announced by President Trump, including several of his allies and past associates. Those include George Papadopoulous, who pleaded guilty in the Mueller probe to lying to the FBI about his contacts with Russians. He's the fourth person, John, that the president has granted clemency to in the Russia probe so far, clearly sending a message with this latest pardon with Papadopoulos. Also on the list, two corrupt GOP allies who were early supporters of President Trump, Chris Collins and Duncan Hunter. Hunter, who was sentenced to 11 months earlier this year for misuse of more than $200,000 in campaign funds, will now not serve any time behind bars with this pardon. Then you have Collins, who was sent to prison in October of this year for insider trading activity that he engaged in while on White House grounds, according to investigators. Other controversial names on this pardon list from the president are 4 Blackwater guards involved in war crimes, the massacre of Iraqi civilians, including one, Nicholas Slatton, who had been convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. So those are some of the key names that that are on this list, John. And there are many others we should mention of non-violent drug offenders that are also on here. About half of the list on this pardon sheet, this press release from the White House, are those non-violent drug offenders, John.
You know, Pamela, I think the Collins and Hunter were literally the first 2 House members to endorse then-candidate Donald Trump. That's quite a return on an investment all these years later.
Quite a return on investment, and you also have to think about that in terms of the Russia probe. You have now you have George Papadopoulos, who investigators said was not cooperative during the probe. The past clemency for Roger Stone, and of course Michael Flynn, and also Alex Swan is on here too. He was also convicted in the Russia probe for lying to the FBI, and so this could be seen as a way of the president returning the favor for their loyalty for not cooperating with investigators, and as well as you mentioned the 2 GOP allies who were early supporters of the president. They were 2 people in Congress who came out very early on to throw their support behind the president. What's also interesting in this list here, John, I want to point out these 2 former Border Patrol agents who were sentenced to prison in 2005 for shooting an unarmed, undocumented immigrant. They were hailed as heroes, basically, in right-wing media at the time. And so they are also on this list. That is also a common thread among some of the more high-profile pardons on this list, the fact that many of them were heralded as heroes by right-wing media in many of these cases. And we know the president is unorthodox in the way he's gone about pardons. He's watched media, Fox News, other outlets, to get ideas of who he should pardon, along with members of Congress and his own attorney, Rudy Giuliani, and many others. He's gone about this in a very different way. And we know that from past pardons, he has not gone the traditional route of having it go through the DOJ system. It's all been going through the White House for the most part, John. Yeah, this is part pardon list, part conservative TV lineup on one of these conservative networks. Pamela Brown, thanks so much for being with us tonight. Appreciate it. More now from CNN White House correspondent John Harwood. John, what are you hearing from the White House tonight about these pardons?
Well, we're not hearing anything from the White House. The president hasn't tweeted on that subject. But I think we need to step back a little bit and put this in the context of the other things that we've been seeing from the White House over the last several days. You know, there's part of President Trump that is delusional. He's psychologically unbalanced. He clearly cannot process the fact that he lost the election. But there's another big part of him which is very laser focused on abusing government power to his personal benefit. Of course, he got impeached for that with respect to Ukraine. And what we see in these pardons, as Pam was just outlining, is an attempt to erase the Mueller probe. He's already tried to do that with Mike Flynn. He's tried to do that by commuting the sentence of Roger Stone. He may give Stone a pardon as well. In addition to Van der Zwaan and George Papadopoulos, I think people are expecting that he'll try to pardon Paul Manafort. Now, what does that do for him? Well, first of all, reputationally, if he can try to show that the Russia probe was a hoax, it was not a hoax. If he can show that, that benefits him. But secondly, some of these people, especially Manafort and Stone, may know things that are detrimental to President Trump. And so by protecting people involved in those in the Russian activities, he is protecting himself. One other thing to note is on those pardons of the Blackwater guards, the chairman of Blackwater at the time those murders took place in Iraq was Eric Prince, who is the brother of Betsy DeVos, his education secretary. Eric Prince was also caught up in the Mueller probe because of a meeting that he had in the Seychelles with a Russian businessman who was an intermediary to Vladimir Putin. Now, it appears that that was not part of the campaign activity. It was about something else. Nevertheless, that was part of it. And I think it is worth noting in this context that we're ending the administration, John, with a massive hack of the U.S. government and U.S. business by Russia that the president is trying to absolve Russia for. There is a very clear pattern in his relationship with Russia. Russia was his financial benefactor. He had a Putin-aligned campaign chairman. He's now trying to wipe out legal cases, and look what Russia's doing to the U.S. right now.
Look, he's pardoning confessed liars, corrupt politicians, and convicted murderers, all on the same day where he's taking meetings to overturn the election. That's quite an agenda, John. What's the latest on the overturning a democratic election part of it?
Well, he's not going to overturn the election, but in a House of Representatives where 126 Republicans signed on to this crazy lawsuit that the Supreme Court laughed out of court to try to overturn the results of swing states, he's going to get more than one member willing to try to challenge the certification of electoral votes on January 6th. There's an open question as to whether or not he can get Republican senators because Republicans don't want to be forced into an embarrassing vote. It's not going to change the situation. Joe Biden is going to become president on January 20th. We know that. But the president is choking psychologically on his defeat. He's thrashing about, looking for any kind of scheme that any of the kooky people around him can convince him to pursue to try to overturn it. They're not going to work, but he can't stop doing it.
John Harwood, thanks so much for being with us tonight. Perspective now from CNN political analyst and New York Times White House correspondent Maggie Haberman, who's been reporting on the pardons for weeks now. Also with us, CNN senior political analyst David Gergen, who watched it all come unglued during Richard Nixon's final days, and also CNN contributor and former Nixon White House counsel John Dean. Maggie, I want to start with you. You and Michael Schmidt. Tonight in the Times, moments ago, you posted your story, and you called this, quote, an audacious pre-Christmas round of pardons. What's the theme that you see in this list of names?
The main theme, John, is people who are close to President Trump or people who he thinks will help absolve him of any implication in the investigation into possible conspiracy between his campaign and Russian officials in 2016. Then you throw in, I don't think this is getting enough attention, frankly, these Blackwater pardons of 4 men who were convicted of a massacre of Iraqi civilians in 2007, including 2 children. So that's the one that thematically is not specific to the president, other than the fact that Blackwater was founded by Eric Prince, who is a Trump ally, and whose sister is the education secretary. So that is the theme overall. But on the one hand, you have the president talking about, it's not unusual for presidents to wield their pardon power in their final days. It's not unusual for controversial pardons to happen. Bill Clinton famously pardoned Mark Rich, a financier, at the end of his term in 2000. But what is different here is, number one, the scope of these, and number two, the fact that, the president on the one hand is talking about draining the swamp, but on the other, these are 3 congressmen who were convicted of corruption charges. And in one case, he's commuting the sentence, but in the other 2, he's just issuing full pardons, one of whom has no time served, and these were early backers of his. So he is the through line throughout.
Hunter and Collins both pleaded guilty. They were the first 2 members to endorse him. Like I said, quite a return on the investment. As for the Blackwater convicted killers, we're not overlooking that at all, Maggie. I spent a lot of years in Iraq. That is a heinous crime that they were charged of and convicted of, to say the least. John Dean, where does this all fall on your radar? Your first take?
Well, my first take was to look at the statement that came along and accompanied the issuing of the pardons. And it's kind of a stunning statement. When you look at the Russian investigation part of it, the Papadopoulos, for example, the statement flat out calls it a process crime to lie to the FBI, but says the pardon helps correct the wrongs the Mueller team inflicted on so many people. That's really quite a remarkable statement to have with this pardon. It's more than a slap, it's an attack, John.
Yeah, look, there's another word for a process crime, and that's just crime. it's a crime, right?
Exactly.
It's a crime.
All of Watergate was basically process crimes.